Welcome back to Sunrise. Today, keeping our focus on Edo elections. Babajide Ogunsanwo, channel surveys, data and information analyst, joins us now. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Great to be there.
Well, yeah, it's going to be very interesting. The figures at the end of the day, which we will come to much later, but in terms of the previous data that's been published about elections generally, maybe even relating to Edo or elsewhere, what do we expect?
Lots of interesting things. First of all, let's look at how Edo evolved, the history of Edo. And remember, that was 2.5 decades ago, August 27 of 1991. That was exactly 6 years after President Buhari then had been ousted by General IBB. But we're not going to talk about what the implication of creating Edo exactly 6 years after the president was ousted. Here's what INEC says about today's elections. They say there are approximately 2,600 polling units. They've created approximately 4,000 voting points. Now, INEC also says that there are 1.9 million registered voters in Edo State today. The challenge is, if we look at last year's presidential election, Edo State had the lowest voter turnout in the south-south region. So here's the question: why don't the people of Edo State come out to vote? Now, there are 3 reasons we found. The first reason is the fear of violence. The second reason is the fear that their votes wouldn't count, Chamberlain. Now, the third reason is Telemundo. Now, you might ask, what does Telemundo have to do with them not coming out to vote? Here's what the Bureau of Statistics says. They say Edo State has the 3rd highest television ownership rate in Nigeria, just slightly behind Lagos and Delta states.
And what's the demographics of those watching this Telemundo? In terms of those, the voter, 1.9 million voters.
So we've got a lot of women. So here's what the results show. They show that in 2 key local governments in Edo State, where you have a lot of population, Oka and Ego, they say that they have more women than men in those local governments. So we clearly understand the 3 reasons why voter turnout has been low in Edo State. But Chamberlain, you've got a big smile on your face.
I don't know. I find that amazing, knowing full well that over the years, well, you have your stats, but because if you look at it over the years, I think we've seen many women partake in elections in Nigeria. I think the women folk have actually done a whole lot when it comes to voting, and that is why they are one strong force to reckon with when it comes to politics and politicking.
Oh, yes. So we're going to be talking about women in Edo shortly as we discuss, and believe it, apart from the beautiful women in Edo, they've got lots of intelligent women, even though we don't have any woman as key runners in this election, but the women in Edo are intelligent and they'll be playing a big role in who becomes the next governor. Well, here's the interesting thing. We've looked at the governorship results that have been released across all the previous 5 states in the south region. Now, if you look at those results, we're waiting for the 6th, which is Edo. Here's what it shows us. In Bayelsa, we can clearly see the PDP won. That same result happened in Cross River, Rivers, Delta, and Akwa Ibom. Despite these victories for this party, that doesn't give them a guarantee on who will win this election. The results will be determined by the people. But here's what it tells us. It tells us that there seems to be a high willingness for the people of the South to tilt towards one party. Especially if we look at the winning margins that have occurred across the several regions. It clearly allows us to know that despite the victories that we've seen across one party, the other major party still has a huge potential for victory. So if you look at this graph from the left to the right side, it shows the winning margin of the party over the various states. For instance, the last election in Bayelsa, the governor won 61% of the votes between those two major parties. You see what happened in Cross River, Rivers, Delta, and Akwa Ibom. So looking towards the left, it gives us an inclination of who potentially could win this. However, if you look at it from the right to the left, it gives us a different view. The reason why we think this will be an extremely, and this is too close to call this, let's look at Bayelsa, which is one of the most recent elections. The governor marginally got 61% of the votes between the APC and the PDP. So clearly, it's an interesting one to find out what exactly the people of Edo will decide on.
You know, and that's why, I mean, when you look at the voting pattern across the country, then state by state, different states vote differently for presidential and governorship elections. You know, so when you now say that, you know, how or what affected voting pattern at that time for, I think it was the presidential, or was it the government? No, it was presidential. What about the local elections that happened? Remember, they had some elections in those states, and the voting pattern was a little different from what it was before.
Yes, the voting pattern was a little bit different, but we know the top two major ones are the presidential and the governorship. And we remember what...
But, and isn't local elections very dear to the people? So the dynamics change.
And that's why we say this time around, the dynamics potentially could change. Because you know that in Edo currently, if you look at the local way the state has been segmented, there are three major zones. So we've got the Edo Central that has 5 local governments. Speaking of local, so we've got 5 local governments across the Edo Central zone. Now, during the last governorship election, it accounted for 115,000 valid votes. Now, there's another big zone that has 6 local governments, and that's Edo North. Last governorship election accounted for 203,000 valid votes. Now, here's where today's big one will be located. The 7 local governments in Edo South. The top 2 leading candidates are from Edo South. 7 local governments, last election, over 300,000 votes. So a lot of activities, and what INEC and the police especially will have to work on is what exactly goes on in Edo South. 7 local governments, largest population of voters. Between Edo North, between 2 local governments in Edo North and 3 local governments in Edo South is where 50% of the voters are.
So now that we have all this 26,900 personnel, minus the 15,000 plus civil defense, maybe at the South and the entire state, you say, okay, well, the security, so we will come out and vote.
And the most important thing is we need to have an election that is violent-free. Success today isn't just success on which of these candidates win. Success should also be measured on a 0 death rate.
Okay,
after the election.
We'll come back to this soon, but let's find out where Seun is. Is he North, South, or Central? Where has he moved to this time, and what's happening where he is? Seun,